I think it's a privilege to be doing this. Also, I would like to thank UNDP on behalf of the project management team for making this happen, not only for us as a university, but just for the work that we're doing for the community as well. I think representing the team that went to the Koroipita Model Town, we wanted to really have a look at a community and how they function, in terms of their everyday life, in terms of their everyday waste management practices. And so I think one of the main objectives was exactly that, was to find out what were people's practices, both in terms of what the management or what the implementation mechanisms have been placed there for them, and then also in terms of what human beings, as normal human beings functioning in everyday life, do in terms of waste management. And so that was part of the main objectives. I felt that, just to sense how people feel about waste management. From there, the team sought to perhaps inculcate in them better practices that they could implement within the community setup that could assist in waste management or managing the waste better than what they were doing. And this included things like better waste sorting, what to do with the waste once it's sorted, to hopefully understand that plastic waste particularly is leading to Fiji's waste problem, and what can be done about better plastic waste management, and also the subsequent upcycling program. So I guess in a gist, that's what the main purpose of holding this project was. Yes.
So now when you talk about waste management in Fiji, we see that there is a lot of issues because this is a very complex systemic issues. If you may, could you just tell us a little bit about how did the project team, specifically assess the market efficiency for waste management at that particular community in Koroipita, given its unique setup? We know that, it's a very close community. It has got a very strong, strengthened governance structure when it comes to households, living as environmentally friendly households. And then, they inculcate a culture of, good citizenship, and also in terms of how to better manage when it comes to the waste in that closed ecosystem. So if you could elaborate a little bit on that as well.
So sure. So one of the first things that we did is we wanted to establish a good rapport with the community itself. And so a number of visits were made to the community. We met with the community leaders, the community management, and I think it's on the basis of building this good rapport that we were able to do the subsequent steps which we did. So we had questionnaires that were filled out, and we had a lovely team doing that as well. We engaged students to help with this, and that I think better led to that good relationship that we established with the community. And so through these questionnaires, we were able to elicit quite a bit of information about, like I said, the waste management practices that the community already had, and also what they felt about some of the ideas that we were suggesting to them. So mainly it was based on these interviews and the questionnaires that we had drafted, and then based on the answers that we were able to get, what sort of analysis that we did on those answers to hopefully be able to suggest, recommend changes.
Right.
Yes.
So I understand that you co-drafted the survey
Right.
Initially with the community. So
Yes.
what does this really entail?
I'm hoping I'm answering your question accurately, because to my understanding, it meant that the types of questions that were crafted needed an understanding from us of where the community was and what we observed from our initial communication and our relationship building with the community, to be able to help us to then supply them with questions that they could relate to. And then hopefully also with the answer that we received, we could do the analysis that we wanted based on the goals that we were trying to achieve.
Got it.
Yes.
So having understood that relationship building and rapport, etc., let's move on to my next question, which is really in terms of the findings itself, right? So what are some of the key findings and learnings that you generated as an implementing partner for this project? What were your uptakes? What were your the positive outcomes from this project, and how did it benefit the community? How does it benefit the academia? How does it benefit your work as part of the project team?
Okay, sure. That's a very multi-tiered question. I will attempt to answer that. Hopefully all captured in my answer. But I think one of the biggest successes of this, even without the questionnaire, was just from observation that we were able to see that the community already had implemented a number of practices that we thought just need a little bit of fine-tuning, and that perhaps with a little bit more education, a little bit more communication to them, and like sessions, further sessions, that they'd really be able to just get on board with what they were already doing. And so the furtherance part from our end was more so about things like the upcycling part, and then the waste sorting at the household level. Because when we study the Koroipita Model Town, their waste sorting actually kicks in when they carry their waste to these unique stations. And so they sort their waste there. And so part of our, I guess, our presence there was to provide them with bins, provide them with other receptacles, so that from the education perspective also, and the sorting could happen beforehand at the household level. And then the next part of that was the upcycling, where we were hopefully able to share with them practices that they could use for the plastic items that were mostly non-recyclable, and to turn them into artwork, turn them into craft projects that could not only help with the plastic problem, but also to help them earn money. So it was part of that education, that awareness, that hopefully we were aiming to inculcate in them.
Okay, that's
Yes.
great. I mean, during our walkthrough today, we realized that, of course, the experimentation has been successful. So based on your observations and based on, the learnings that you have had, what are some of the 3 key highlights for you?
I thought, in terms of the highlights that I picked up, was look, I had the privilege to do the upcycling training myself, so maybe I'd like to speak a little bit about that. From the upcycling training itself, there were a number of residents who attended the training who were very keen on it, and you could tell that interest was there, and they saw that this could lead to something. So when you're able to impart to them that this is a potential avenue of income and it can generate income, maybe it needs a little bit more resources, it needs like a proper setup of further resources, like I said, but it could lead to something. And I think that's a real plus for us, that we're able to impart that to the community. Apart from that interest, some were skeptical. I will admit, some were skeptical because they'd never done this before. And perhaps this is a good learning for us, like you said, were highlights. And so I think this is good learning for us, that perhaps we need to do more of these things. We need to travel throughout Fiji maybe and do more of these trainings. Not only the education on how to manage your waste, but then what to do with the waste. Other things to do with the waste if you're not throwing away the waste. I think that's probably a gap right now that we're experiencing in Fiji, because I don't think there's enough training. Apart from that, I noticed just generally very positive feedback from the community. They're very welcoming of us. They enjoyed the training sessions. They enjoyed the waste sorting sessions. Every time, we went to engage, even when the questionnaires, the surveys, the interviews were done, they were very welcoming, and they were willing, largely, to share what they were doing. And so I think that in terms of assessing what we already did and whether we are going to study the potential to do this in other places and implement, such a project elsewhere, I think it's quite a positive sign, that the communities are willing to do this. Yes.
What were some of the things that really surprised you in this entire experiment?
One of the surprising bits of information was that when we, in our interview process and our questions, we sought to find out whether there were sufficient training programs or education or awareness sessions that the community members were subjected to. And I think that was one part that surprised the team quite a bit, that not everyone thought that there was enough education or awareness sessions. And I think that for us, that's a real key point to take away, that if the community or parts of the community even are saying that we don't have sufficient awareness sessions, that is something that can be very easily implemented, by bodies and project teams such as us, who are able to go to communities and get in touch with the city councils, town councils, and other like advocates of climate change and environmental problems, and go to communities, visit them, and train them on things like this. So I thought that was one very surprising piece of information that came out. The people actually don't know about these things.
Okay.
Yes.
In terms of your background, I know that you come from a law background. From a law lens, anything that really was out of the blue for you that you think could contribute to policies and amendments to legislations, etc.
Yes, well, partially at least, because one of the things that I noticed is that this particular community, they have, I think it's a good thing, they have a very comprehensive set of guidelines according to which that community functions.
Right.
And I think that this is very interesting. I mean, we have laws in the country, we have laws in various jurisdictions, whether it's in Nandi, in Lotoka, or Suva, wherever. But for Koroipita, it's like it's this sheltered little community, and that their whole own governance system going. And that could be a really good thing, particularly I think for waste management, because if you have this structure in place and there are potential penalties in place too, and usually it's human nature. If there is a penalty of some sort, you will be forced to abide by the rules that are in place. And so I thought that from a legal perspective, if the governance structure of that community itself could be used somehow to maybe challenge the rest of Fiji, or challenge a little bit of policy changes for the other laws, and maybe hold that we can be a little bit more stricter with things like people not disposing their waste correctly. I mean, we've got enough problems where you have garbage collections and people use all sorts of receptacles for garbage disposal where they should not be doing that. And so if we were able to implement some of these measures that Koroipita is already doing, perhaps on a more larger national scale, then I think we could really take a real hack at reducing the pollution problem.
Yeah, I hear you. There's a potential of scaling the learnings and insights
Absolutely.
that have been generated from this experiment. Now, let me move on to my next question, which is really about the challenges and the obstacles that you may have faced, as part of being the project team or the project team itself in implementing this project. What would be some of these obstacles or challenges, in your opinion?
Well, my lovely colleagues and I were part of this project team. We had a number of things to juggle with when we were completing this project. That's not to say that it was not interesting. It was extremely interesting. Apart from the juggling with our own schedules, at times we did face... No, not all the times when you're running these surveys and interviews, are everybody welcoming of the question. So that was one challenge as well. Some individuals are just generally not very keen to open up about their practices. And I mean, I also admit that with some of the questions we were asking about their waste management practices, perhaps they were a bit worried what we were going to do with that information, even though we were very clear with them that this information is like purely voluntary. But some of them were very skeptical why we are engaging in very deep-seated questioning about their waste management practices. I think that was a particular challenge, and maybe also that because they were a little bit worried about the outcome, sometimes, this is a personal opinion, that you cannot, I think, with 100% affirmation know whether everything that they're supplying in terms of their practices are accurate, because they may be worried about what's going to happen with that information. And so I think that that earlier what I mentioned about that rapport building, if we strongly establish a good relationship with the community and they're able to accept that the purpose of this is purely, for data collection and for implementation of good practices, then perhaps they'll be a little bit more comfortable in sharing. That's what I thought was a key part of the challenges.
My next question is really about in terms of creativity and innovation, and I know that you have touched a little bit about on this as we were going through this short interview. Could you highlight the three most creative and innovative strategies or interventions you implemented? I mean, I know it was a project that was implemented as part of a team. The team implemented to improve waste management efficiency in Koroipita, and the insights that have been generated, and the learnings that has been captured. What does it mean for the project team, and what does it also mean for the Koroipita community in general?
You asked some hard questions. So the first part, I think I've already maybe perhaps addressed that as part of another question. So yes, part of the strategies were the purchasing of specific receptacles at the household level, so that they could do the sorting at the household level. And we thought that resulted in some good changes in terms of what they were doing. And the second part of that was the upcycling training. Like I said, because I was part of the training myself, I thought that went quite well, because I'm engaged myself in some upcycling on a personal level, and so I was really glad to be able to share that with the community, some of the ideas, etc. Also, sorry, that last part of the question, because you were asking about what can be done with this, and I thought that yes, perhaps with some of these practices being implemented elsewhere. I'm not sure if that's correctly answering your question, though.
I mean, elsewhere, like which type of community would this be in your views and observations from
Right.
this particular experiment?
Right.
And what type of support may be needed to implement this?
Right. You know how when we're talking earlier about this hopefully policy changes, etc., that could be implemented elsewhere. I think, even with things like this, like upcycling or just learning how else, you can repurpose your waste into other better things. I think that, if we had the liberty to try this model project elsewhere, any other jurisdiction, it's maybe a small community somewhere, and obviously that would require maybe perhaps some funding, it would require a good team, it would again require the resources that we had to do this particular project. I think it would be good to test whether the results that we achieved, and maybe some of which is in progress right now, would be achievable if we implemented the same thing in another community. Perhaps with a small start, but then, just to see if we are able to get a similar results. And also, if I may add, because when we did this project in Koroipita, we studied like 30 households. And so, I don't know if it's correct to definitively say that whatever we have got is just 100%. That's why we need more data. We need to study other communities, or we need to study other households as well within that community to be able to test whether this data is truly representative of the entire community. Yes, so that would need like a part 2 or a part 3 of the project as well.
That makes complete sense. Now, the results that has been captured so far, do you think that is something that could be scalable? And if that can be scalable, in what forms would this be scalable to other parts of the country?
I think I have to be a little bit cautious with that answer based on, I think, what I've just said. I wouldn't say that we should be too hasty with drawing an analysis on the scalability, because I think we'd need to do more studies. Yes, on a larger.
What would these more studies include?
So yeah, with the same thing, with more households perhaps in Koroipita, because we attacked one particular block in Koroipita, so perhaps with other blocks there, and then hopefully to do some sort of a comparable study in another community as well. Because I think that would give a good comparison to be able to say that yes, this data is like truly reflective of some of the initial analysis that we are drawing out of it.
Do you see that there is issues of data in Fiji when it comes to circular economy and waste management in general?
In my opinion, I'm not sure if I'm the guru on the subject, but yes, I think we can always do with more data on this, because like right now, we're faced with this huge climate change disaster that we're facing every single day. Obviously, some parts of the country face it more than the others, but I think every bit of data that we can collect is always a positive step towards understanding what we're doing, and mostly understanding what we're doing wrong, to be able to stop doing that, and then work towards saving the environment and doing better things, and with waste management, to changing our habits.
Right.
Yes.
Right. I mean, they say that sometimes you can just mitigate 90% of the problem just by changing people's
Exactly
behaviors,
right.
mindsets, and
Exactly
attitudes.
right.
But at the same time, these issues of developmental challenges are really complex in nature, right? You can be sorting your waste at the source, but then if you have other facilities in the process that does not exist,
Exactly right.
then you are
falls through.
you are literally forcing yourself to do something that does not have any impact at the end of the spectrum. But what would your suggestions be in that sense, like when it comes to looking at the problem from a systemic point of view?
Right. Again, I'm not going to profess that I'm the expert on the subject, but I was privileged to attend this particular conference some months ago. And I remember Waste Recyclers Fiji, they had a major role in that particular conference. And it was really nice to see that this particular organization is really taking huge strides into practices, into having stations. I've forgotten what they call them, but yeah, they were implementing these various stations in Fiji where there were hubs. I think that's what they call them. That's the one. Yes, sorry. So they were trying to implement that, and I think that's a real positive step, because you do that, then at least the members of the community who are perhaps not as aware, but having a physical manifestation of what we are wanting to achieve, having that there will give that education, if the education is the missing link. And so if you're asking for a suggestion, that hub is an absolute positive tick. We need perhaps more of those things implemented in Fiji,
It's great that you are talking about the iRecycle Hub, and I'm very happy to tell you also that is an experiment that UNDP Accelerator Lab also
Wow, fantastic.
supported
Yes.
as part of our circular economy
Right.
problem space,
Right.
to see how we can sort and segregate waste using the iRecycle Hub program
Right.
at hotels and resorts.
Wow,
So,
that's excellent.
so whatever data that we are capturing from the experiment that you implemented as part of the circular economy space for us, the waste recyclers is also one of our implementing partners for the iRecycle
That is
Hub.
fantastic, because I'm glad you said that, because the next part of what I was going to say is that this is what we need. We need organizations who are helping each other to function towards a common goal, because if you're working in isolation, then it's always going to be a disjoint. So it's fantastic that you have these internal collaboration. Yes.
So the way we see the waste recyclers is like a private sector in
Right.
the ecosystem,
Right.
What would you have to say about the role of the private sector for achieving circular economy objectives in Fiji?
Oh my goodness, that's a very difficult question. I think, and perhaps I'm oversimplifying this, but part of something that I wanted to convey in this message was that when we're talking about waste management, or when we're talking about a climate crisis or an environmental crisis, it's often not just talking about like fanciful ideas on top. It does come down to the individual level. So even if we're talking about the private sector, we're talking about traders, businesses, etc., or even the individual, it's a lot about that mindset that we're trying to change. And like I said, I'm not trying to oversimplify this, but it's every time you make a choice about some action that I'm going to perform, something that I'm going to do, that the choice you make right there, that has repercussions. And so this is something that I really felt at Koroipita, that perhaps the community is doing it because of the strong governance mechanisms in place, and perhaps some of them are doing it because they feel it's the right thing to do. But either way, that is positively contributing to what we are after here. And so if you're talking about the private sector, then I would sort of try and assimilate that same sort of responsibility that the private sector can take as well, with respect to their actions, how their actions are either positively or negatively contributing, and what they can do about managing that. Yeah.
So this is really my final question to you, and of course this is something that is out of just my mind.
Sure.
And also, given that you come from the law background and you utilize the law lands for the project, the experiment that was implemented in Koroipita, would you be able to say how we can, contribute to the policy space for circular economy or, environmental management, etc., so that we are able to, realize our circular economy visions for Fiji? And what would this really entail? Like, what will be some of the policy changes from a law perspective that would be required?
Oh my goodness, you're asking the wrong person. That should be directed to the minister. I'm not trying to, again, oversimplify this, but like from some of the material that we've had and from working with the community and just general observations, how sometimes we have practices in place. And then, and what I mean by that is, like, at one time in Fiji, we had these anti-litter laws. We had these, fines for disposing of your garbage inappropriately in public places. And, there was supposed to be a fine associated with it. The trouble is, sometimes, the measures might be there, so you've got the apparent practices in place, but the implementation of it, and then who is safeguarding? Who is safeguarding those practices that are supposedly good for us? Because if you've got policies in place, then the implementation of it must be there as well. And then you must keep testing the efficiency and effectiveness of those policies based on what the data on the ground is showing us. If the data on the ground is showing us that, we're fighting this waste management battle, but really not getting anywhere with it, that means there's something that we need to go back to the drawing board about, that something there is not working. And so if you're asking about policy changes, like for me, primarily right now, without naming any specific change, is just to go back to the drawing board, study that piece of legislation, study any associated legislation, and figure out what is happening on the ground and whether the laws that are currently in place is matching and is able to address those problems. Because unless we do that in relation to the data, we will never be able to find out what the lacuna is in the law, where the gaps are, so that we can fill it in based on what we're observing. So that's my very general statement about it. I think we just need to go back to the drawing board, and from studies like this, will we only be able to find out where we can implement those policy changes.
Okay. Just a leading question to that. I know that you're also contributing to the policy brief that is,
Yes.
emerging from this experiment. Just briefly tell us what are some of the key elements of this policy brief that's, being populated by you.
Perhaps it's a bit too early to respond to that right now. It's still in its initial stages, but that's one of the things that I have mentioned as part of the team in that policy brief as well. That I've tried to study some of the sections in the current empowering statutes which deal with the environment, and try to identify where there could be ambiguities. So, sometimes when we're talking about like litter, for example, then we're living in this space, I think, where we need to be very, very specific. And so any ambiguities in the law will lead to potential perpetrators of that legislation to get away with what they're doing. And so for me, I think that was one angle I was taking. And like I said, it's work in progress right now, but that was one particular angle, is to try and remove as many, or suggest changes to remove ambiguities from the law, so that again, it can better address the problems. And then if you have potential perpetrators, then there is very little wiggle room for the perpetrators. And it's not that, we're after holding people accountable just for compensation, etc. The bigger picture for me and for this team has always been that we're here for waste management. We're here because the bigger picture is protection of the environment. It's to try and mitigate the climate change issues that we're faced with. And that basic understanding is what should drive these policy changes. Yes.
And do you think the waste management is related to climate change?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I
Why
think
would you say?
Yeah, I don't think that you can escape from it, because I think for that there's enough data that's available. It's affecting human security, it's affecting food security, and so like every time, the most basic example, which I think has been advertised in media as well, is you throw enough garbage. You dispose enough garbage in a careless manner, that garbage finds its way somewhere else, that garbage accumulates somewhere, it has the potential to destroy vegetation, to destroy marine life, and so it's all part of this bigger chain, and every action is sort of related. So I think it's very unwise, or perhaps very juvenile, to think that you can not remove this from the equation and everything will remain the same. So yeah, I think absolutely you cannot escape from the fact that waste management and climate change are integrally linked.